at noon, I guess. My name is Leah Rappa. I work for the Denver Public Schools Substance Use Prevention Program, and our program hosts these webinars every fourth Wednesday of the month at noon, and we bring in experts from the Denver community to talk about topics that are relevant to DPS students and their families. And today I am so excited about our guests. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in with the introduction. From Sollus Nutrition, Lauren Moore and Leslie Nemeth are joining us to talk about the relationship between nutrition and mental health. Lauren and Leslie, thank you for being here.
Hey guys, thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Let's jump right in. Okay. So like Leah said, we're going to talk a little bit about sort of what we like to call like the intersection of like whole body health. And so, just for a little background, Leslie and I both are in the same practice, and we're mostly treating people who suffer with eating disorders. I want to name right away that I think a lot of times people, when they hear that we treat eating disorders, are like, oh, the nutrition information that we receive from them is biased, right? It's for people with eating disorders. And so, we want to like say out loud today that we're normal people, dietitians too. And we mostly want to talk about sort of what we are noticing in our culture of late of really heavy diet culture, and the impact that might have on our children. Certainly one of the impacts being eating disorders, but I think that's probably on the extreme end. But there's a large population of people who have eating disorders too, so we don't want to discredit that as a possibility. But we want to talk about not just preventing eating disorders, but sort of fostering a more wholesome relationship with your body, yours and your children. And so, I have two young children. I have a 4-year-old and a 9-month-old. And so, I'm just really getting into this. And so, we are practicing this in our own lives all the time too. And it's exhausting and it's constant work. And so we're not perfection. Like we don't have this down pat by any means, but, want to keep practicing and doing our best every day. Leslie, do you have anything you want to say?
No, I think, that was well said. The thing to add is just that, like a lot of our relationship with food and bodies really stem from a lot of biases that we've developed along the way. So from diet culture or weight bias or just our own upbringing, our own experiences in life. And, the takeaway for this talk today is really just to, I think, create like an awareness that like, maybe this is where it comes from. And because sometimes, we all are wanting to strive to have like our kids have a healthy relationship with food and their body. And sometimes when we promote those things, we can accidentally do a little harm. And so again, it's just kind of understanding where these biases might come from and just maybe giving you some ideas of like, just how to be a little bit more aware of that and maybe kind of change language around certain things.
Right. Right. Like we want you to understand that we're in a completely non-judgmental role, that we know that everybody is doing these behaviors and doing these things as a way to have healthy children. And like, isn't that the goal in life, is to like raise happy, healthy children. And so we want you to give you an opportunity to like let go of some of these things that you might have learned, rather than have to like take on another burden of learning something else completely, to just be able to let go some of these things that maybe has been installed in you. Let's get started. And so the first, you'll see lots of quotes in here, and some are actually from people like Instagram influencers, and we've asked permission for all the graphics that we've used. And I urge you, if you see something that strikes you, to go. And I think that's one of my best tips for people, is like sort of flood your social media and offer your children to flood their social media with people who are more body positive. And so this sort of goes to speak that adolescent obesity and eating disorders are two sides of the same coin. A culture that tells young women, and to a lesser extent men, that the size of their bodies is the most important thing about them, and offers them an endless selection of diet and exercise plans. And so again, I think that when we're talking to people that they think, oh, well, my child's on the opposite end of the spectrum. I feel like they need to lose weight, or I need to lose weight, or whatever. The eating disorders and obesity and everything in between is all part of the same issue. And it's all addressing from the same culprit of our diet culture.
So that sort of brings us to this slide here of a healthy weight, and I think we need to really just name that, like, we have a cultural fear of fatness, and that really influences diet culture, which then kind of influences like what we decide to eat or not eat, and how we decide to exercise. And so we really fall into this trap of measuring health by our weight, when in fact we know that health status is not a good measure of health. We know that you could be in a large body and be super healthy, and we know you can be in a very small body and be very unhealthy. And a lot of where we kind of get that from stems from the BMI. I mean, it's a very basic tool that is used. Probably everybody knows their BMI or has been told their BMI when they go to a doctor. And really what that looks at is your height and your weight. And then the simple calculation kind of spits your weight out into these columns of either being like normal weight or overweight, underweight, obese, etc. There's a big problem with BMI, and the BMI, like, it was really developed as a way to kind of help the government allocate resources by obesity in the community, and it works one way, but it doesn't work the other way. So for example, somebody who is obese will have a high BMI, but somebody with a high BMI is not always obese. So it doesn't really work. And it doesn't work because it doesn't take into account lots of things. For example, it doesn't look at bone density, which is more dense than muscle. It doesn't look at muscle, which is more or twice as dense really as fat. And it doesn't account for any sexual or sex or racial differences. And so it's really not presenting the full picture. And it's just really frustrating that you go to a doctor and like they don't have that much time. They kind of spit out the information. They say, hey, you're falling in the overweight category. Maybe you should lose some weight. And then you kind of go on this journey of like trying to lose weight, but not, but you could be eating well and exercising and actually have a pretty good relationship overall with like health and diet and exercise, but you're being told to lose weight for some reason. So, and really what we see is that actually, a low BMI is more dangerous and is actually it's the highest mortality rate of all of the BMIs. So it's interesting that we sort of hyper focus on the high BMI when really the low BMI is more of an issue.
Right. And like, as a little fun fact that, BMI was created a very long time ago, and the research that they did on BMI to use it as a health factor was done on white males that are middle-aged. And so there's actually very little to no research done on women, done on people of color, done on children especially. And so when you get a BMI read, sometimes at the physician for your child, there's not research done on that, and so it's irrelevant. And so we want to drive this point home and really empower you, to know that BMI is not an indicator of health. It's like, if you take nothing else away from it today, take away that like BMI is not an indicator of health. So I have a little blurb on here about COVID, and we know this is a little bit saucy, and so we don't mean it to be saucy in that way, but what I want to point out is this is something really relevant in nowadays times. And so I want to talk about the difference between causation and correlation language, because a lot of the times in research or information that you see on the internet about disease states or a plethora of things, it's typically talking correlation language. So here's an example that, again, very close to home. So this is on the CDC's website. This is in bold at the very top. Adults with excess weight are at even greater risk during the COVID pandemic. Now, what this reads is, okay, when my doctor told me on my BMI that I'm overweight, let's say, I am more at risk of dying from the COVID pandemic. That's terrifying, right? We're all in this it's a fear tactic to get us looped in and to, again, reasonably taking care of your health better. So, but what happens and what's happening with my clients is they come in panic and want to then rapidly lose weight, which is not healthy and not a well way of getting into a healthier body. So, and I will say the CDC later in smaller language does say what this correlation language actually says too. So that was causation language when it's really correlation. There's no data that proves that obesity is an independent risk factor or predictor for hospitalization or mortality with COVID-19. The reason people with obesity may be at higher risk is the potential for underlying diseases that may be associated with obesity. So like Leslie was giving us an example, somebody that may be obese or may be in a bigger body may have respiratory issues, may have diabetes, may have some of the predictors. And on the other side of the coin, they also may be just in a bigger body with no risk factors at all. They may be in a bigger body and be fully healthy. So that language of if you have excess weight just as the only predictor, it really is not a great message to be sending because it's wildly inaccurate. And again, it just causes a lot of fear, I think, unnecessarily. And I point this up here for CDC because the CDC is a huge health industry, or is a huge health website that we can go onto and get information from. And I know they don't mean to sort of have a weight bias, but it's even in the like most small places that you will see a weight bias. And again, that just causes a lot of fear unnecessarily.
Yeah, and that causation correlation language heavily is you'll see that in sort of the diet industry for sure. But so what is a healthy diet? You know, this is sort of like the $1 million question. It's the one that keeps the diet industry and now sort of rebranded as wellness industry afloat. There's so many different diets out there, and there's lots of theories and books written by different doctors. You know, we're not here today to kind of promote or shame any of these diets. What we see, however, is that the more dieting that people do leads to more rules, which leads to like a lot of stress and confusion on what to eat, which can lead to like a poor relationship with food and, you know, eventually some sort of eating disorder, just disordered eating. And it's really frustrating. And so what we, you know, like to tell people, actually this quote really, excuse me, this quote says it well, is, you know, when you have a thought about what to eat or what you shouldn't eat, really ask yourself, like, who told me that? And are they profiting from this? You know, and I think that's just really, really important to ask yourselves because there are so many different theories out there. But for what we know, when we see clients who either maybe not have an eating disorder, just they actually have had like chronic dieting in their life, like we do see a lot of those people. This is what, you know, what we know and what we encourage is that, like, you know, cutting out food groups is just never okay. We know that we need every single one of the carbohydrates, the proteins, the fats for full body function. We know that the primary energy source of our brain is glucose. So we have to be fueling our brain with glucose. Again, the biggest factors that we see that lead to binge eating or overeating are restrictive eating. So basically that looks like dieting. So when we diet, we're creating that deprivation in our bodies, which kind of can then lead to eventually overeating. And I think Lauren will go into a little bit more about what that looks like. But for the sake of the purpose of like, what is a healthy diet? Is that we're making sure that we're eating all the different food groups. And the way that we could do that is to make sure that we are eating 3 balanced meals and 1 to 3 snacks, depending on, you know, a person's needs. But the idea is that you don't really want to let your body get overly hungry and overly full. And so that's just sort of a simple way of, you know, it doesn't matter like how many grams or, you know, weighing your proteins or anything like that. Like it really comes down to like fueling your body appropriately and keeping your metabolism healthy. And on the next slide, Lauren will go into that a little more in detail.
So I have a graph that sort of follows up with this because I think I want you guys to understand loud and clear. Another big takeaway that's really important, I think, diets don't work. And you know, we can say this as two people that have, you know, been witness to hundreds of thousands of diets, witnessing people struggling in their lives and doing this. But also research shows that somewhere around 95% of weight loss attempts fail. So sustainability of diet interventions, meaning the long-term nature of a diet. So can I do this for the rest of my life? Or the lasting effect of whatever it is. So in this point, I think it's talking about weight loss. So sustainability of diet interventions for the purpose of weight loss shows that people regain about 30 to 40% of their lost weight within a year. And longer term follow-up, 2 to 5, showing a gradual return to baseline weight levels or above. And so I'm going to show a graph that it's very lay. So don't take any information from the calories. It's just to show that what we want you to see here is that the light green line is food. The teal or the darker blue line is your metabolism. So as you decrease your food intake calorically, your metabolism moves with that. That's the beauty of our body, that actually it's like the best part about our body is why our point is you don't actually have to do anything. Your body is moving with you and taking care of you. So what happens though, as you decrease, is your brain is moving your metabolic rate for the most part. And so if your brain feels like you're in some sort of famine and you're not eating enough, it's going to move its metabolic rate down so that you're not starving in a jungle somewhere and you have this incredibly fast metabolism. And so then you end up, dying from starvation. It's just sort of the benefit of our metabolism and how our body takes care of us. So this is what I want to show you. This is weight cycling or diet cycling. So you start at the top. So again, the light green line is food. The teal line is metabolism. So let's say you go on your New Year's diet and you start off eating a relatively normalized amount and then follow the green line down. And that's your lowered intake. So let's say you go on this diet, you're eating 1,200 calories. So your metabolism doesn't know this yet. And so it stays, the dark blue line, the same as it was. And then lo and behold, what happens over time, you maintain the diet, let's say for your second week, and your metabolism says, oh my God, I'm starving in a jungle somewhere. Drop it down, right? Slow the system down. And so your metabolic rate will slow down to conserve energy because, again, in the caveman way, which your brain sort of is very similar to a caveman in that way, it wants to just conserve energy because it doesn't know what's going on. All it knows is it's not getting enough fuel to perform the best way that it knows how. So it slows the system down. And we all know, like what we just saw in that last slide, diets don't work. They're not sustainable. You can't sustain a diet for the rest of your life for the most part. And so whether that be because, your children got pizza and it sounded really good, or just because from a caloric standpoint, your body's not going to let you starve yourself to death. And so normally what happens in a diet is people jump back to eating normally again. Sometimes, though, like Leslie said in her note, that you can jump into binging or overeating as a repercussion of not eating enough or depriving yourself of things like your kid's pizza that sounds really good. So you have a cheat day, right? We all know that. And so your food jumps back up to even a relatively normal amount. It doesn't need to be that you're eating a ton of food. It just could be a normalized amount that you're eating. But again, notice your metabolism has learned that you're depriving yourself. And so it stays down low because it's concerned in this feast and famine place that you're in a famine. And so it's concerned that you're going to go again into a famine. And so it slowly inches itself back up again to be where to sort of level itself with the amount that you're eating again. And so that gap that you'll see is weight gain. So this is why in that research that sometimes people may eat even more than they're used to, why you might even gain more weight than you were at baseline to begin with. So you get really excited about the weight loss and then that big gain happens again because again, they're not sustainable.
Oh, here we are. I'm on. All right. So now we're looking at, activity. And I think, I don't think anybody would dispute that physical activity is not a good thing. I think it's across the board. It's good for, cardiovascular. It's good for your brain, decreasing anxiety and stress. Exercise is a wonderful thing. The only time, like anything, too much of anything could be a bad thing, so that could be, exercise could turn to be a bad thing when we're not like fueling our bodies appropriately or we're not sleeping well enough. And so, we just kind of wanted to just put that in there. Um, just to kind of be mindful, like if again, as role models, and we're going to get into that a little bit later, but like we want to role model what physical activity looks like in our house. We want physical activity to be a part of our lifestyle, not like a thing that you have to do. And what this slide is trying to indicate is we don't earn food through exercise. We never want to find ourselves saying things like, "Oh, we gotta go for a walk. We gotta work off those fries and burgers," or "Hey, we're having pizza night, so we need to like go for that bike ride." Food is never earned. Yes, we want to encourage our kids to be physically active because we know of all the wonderful things. But again, we want to do that by getting our kids into activities that they find enjoyable. And again, like it's so important to just like be active as a family, to encourage movement as like a family and doing fun things together. Um, so really that's kind of all I think the takeaway for the physical activity. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Lauren?
No, like it says there, I think, I was thinking last night as I was going to bed, I'm also sleep deprived, just as being like a normal person parent, and I think sometimes we can all be food deprived too, if the busy schedule or something like that. And so, I think the question that came up in my mind is like, are people going to think, well, when if I'm sleep deprived or food deprived, I shouldn't be doing physical activity. When in the world do I do it then? And I think we're talking about here being sleep deprived or food deprived in a more extreme way. So food deprived, certainly, if you're dieting, other things like that, where it's actually not a great idea. Most people think that it's going to increase their metabolic rate to be dieting and then increasing physical activity. That's the perfect combination, right? When in fact, when you're in a deprived state, when your metabolic system is low because it's conserving energy, if you add physical activity on top of that, think about the caveman brain goes, oh my God, we're also running and we don't have enough energy. I'm going to lower my metabolic rate even lower to conserve energy because I don't know when I'm going to have enough energy again. And I need to slow this person down because we don't have enough fuel to get in. And sleep deprived, think about maybe the mom that's getting, a few hours of sleep a night, like really sleep deprived, because I know we're all sleep deprived nowadays. So yeah.
Like just kind of what you kind of said at the beginning, I think just the whole point of this is just kind of letting go of some things. Again, I think we read these recommendations of like, well, I have to get my 10,000 steps in, or I have to get my like 60 minutes in. And, what we're trying to point out in this presentation is like, it's all just it's all a big picture thing here. And again, it's kind of the state of the world and the pandemic and kids at home, like, sometimes physical activity is helpful, but also like if you just can't fit it in, like the stress of like not being able to exercise could probably be doing more damage than good. So again, it's just sort of all kind of part of the same puzzle, which actually brings me like is a great transition into this next slide. There's a lot of cool and exciting research coming out about gut health, and you'll start to kind of see that in the food industry, like marketing of different foods that kind of fuel gut health. And again, we could probably spend the entire presentation on this one slide, probably on every single slide. But the takeaway here is just, again, that like mental health is such a huge part of all of this. And anxiety can be either the cause or the product of GI discomfort. And what I mean by that is if, like I have a lot of kiddos and adults who are just anxious by nature. Like they ended up having an eating disorder, but it didn't come from like wanting to lose weight. It really kind of came from an anxiety disorder. And so what happens is like when you're just an anxious person, really what happens in your gut is it can constrict. It, creates nausea and your body does not want to take in food and it doesn't want to digest food. And so these kiddos end up like having a really difficult time feeding themselves. And so that's one way that anxiety kind of makes the GI issues come about and make eating difficult. And then on the flip side, and I have clients like this who suffer from like IBS or just like stomach issues, food allergies, and therefore they have a lot of fear about like, or their fear comes from like, am I going to get sick from this? And so like sort of GI pain can kind of create anxiety. And so these two things are really interconnected. And that's because our gut really produces these bacteria, or sorry, the gut bacteria produce neurotransmitters like dopamine that really affect our mood. And so these two things are really highly interconnected. And so once again, we are going to probably see this in like the grocery stores. You're going to see the marketing, and people will ask like, what do I eat for gut health? And it's like, there are things that you can eat, but the science isn't totally there yet. Again, a lot of the studies are done on mice that live in like a bubble, so they aren't exposed to different environments. Like we also see that like pets, your environment, stress, lots of things really affect the microbiome. And so just, proceed with caution when you're at the grocery store kind of reading about like gut health. Like, yes, basically eating a diverse diet rich in plants and fiber is like a great thing that increases the diversity of our microbiome. But once again, as we're saying with weight, with exercise, this is just like one piece of the puzzle. And so to not actually like stress yourselves out about like, what is the perfect diet to like fuel my gut, so I have a healthy gut, because they're really, we don't know that yet, and if we do know that, like there's so many other things that can actually like hurt your gut. So yeah, just once again, it's just one piece of the puzzle.
All right, I'm gonna, this quote reminds me of a colleague that talks about this idea of like pre-baby body and post-baby body. And so this quote, I think, touches on it perfectly, that often as parents, I think, and certainly women too, considering we're sort of the, receiver of a lot of this like diet culture talk, that we want to go back to a body that we had, or look forward to a body that we are going to create at some point. And we really want to encourage you guys to like live in this moment, take care of this body that you have right now, rather than thinking, I want to get back to something. Especially if you've had a child, your body's not going to be the same ever again. You've held a child in your body, like nothing will be the same. And I know that brings a lot of sadness and grief for people, and that's okay. But I really want to encourage you, like, be present in this moment and feed your body, nourish your body, take care of your body for today.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to add, like, that's something I find myself saying all the time to my clients. We kind of work on this like body love. You probably may have heard of that. That's kind of some trendier language. And you can't get to body love until you get to body acceptance. So just like Lauren said, like you kind of have to get to a place where you just accept. You don't have to love what you have now, but in order to actually really achieve some of your goals, your health goals, like you kind of have to just start to accept where you're at right now and then kind of move forward. So I know this slide is pretty wordy, and I'm kind of trying to be mindful of the time. So I will try to speed up a little bit, but this is kind of the takeaway for the whole thing here, is like the title of this slide. They are always watching and listening. I mean, the best thing that we can do to help our kids develop a healthy relationship with food, with body, with exercise is to really role model what that looks like, to really like show them that like you take time and you sit down and you nourish yourself, that, you exercise in fun ways, that it's not like a chore that you have to do. And so, some of these like, saying nice things about your own body in front of your children. Again, like if you comment on like a body part, like chances are that they are going to grow up with that same body part, and they've learned to kind of now say like, wow, this is unacceptable, and I have to kind of try to change this. Again, being aware of your own weight biases. Don't talk about other people's weight. Don't comment on them. We're sending that message to our kids that like shape and size is relevant to self-worth. You want to make an effort not to comment on your kid's body, like talk about different qualities, not like, oh, you look so good. Creating space for bodies to change. Oh my goodness. For those of you who have kids entering puberty, I mean, this is such a difficult stage. Like not only are they having a huge surge of hormones, their bodies are taking on different shapes. And so really our job as parents is just to love and accept them as they kind of go through that transitional period. I also want to quickly say, like, being on a diet is not necessarily bad. Everybody has their own goals, and maybe being on a diet is something that is good for you. And we just want to say, like, that's fine, and do so without judgment. So if you're like limiting your carbohydrates, or trying the keto diet or something, that you're not saying like, I don't eat carbs because carbs are fat. So just kind of, again, being non-judgmental when you are, undergoing some dietary changes of your own.
So we found that there's, we could go on forever about recommendations about how to talk to children, but we want to like give you these key takeaways. And so the biggest one, I think, is don't label foods as good and bad. Leslie just pointed this out. I want you to really encourage children, and of course, we would always encourage you to sort of neutralize all food. So, pasta, broccoli, whatever, can it be on the same plane? I'm going to get into this in the next slide too, of like maybe different ways of talking about how food can give you energy, right? I think a lot of us get stuck in this place of like, oh, but broccoli is better than pasta, right? And so if your kid eats all the pasta instead of broccoli, you're stressing about it. And so the next slide might show some good examples of that. Don't temper or promote your child's appetite. Leslie and I just talking about how like difficult this is for us with children, even sitting at our own tables, wanting our children to eat in a balanced way. And I don't know about your kids, but mine don't eat balanced. Yeah. There's times that my daughter won't eat anything. Like, how is that balanced? And other times where, all she wants to eat is one feature, normally carbohydrates. I know that normally is because the carbohydrates taste good. So anyways, what I want to encourage you here is like game face. So my favorite statement is you don't have to eat it, right? So if you I encourage you, put all the features on the plate, put the broccoli, put the pasta, put the protein, and encourage the kid to eat what they can, eat what they want. And when they eat their broccoli, don't cheer and just game face, no matter what it is. Like, know and trust that your child will get what they need. And absolutely do not comment on your child's weight or other children, because again, it's like this inherent message of like, one is better than the other. Okay, so common issues. Well, I just talked about this. Eating the same food group or one food group. It's okay. Try foods, keep doing it. Don't give up on it. Keep trying foods in different ways every single time. Try dips, try sauces, try fried, try roasted. And again, my favorite statement, you don't have to eat it, but just keep it on the plate. Always asking or wanting sweets. This is very scary for a lot of parents that I talk to, but I really encourage people, let's neutralize everything. And I promise you, if you can commit to this philosophy, I rarely make guarantees, but if you can really stick to this idea of like offering all foods without judgment, your child will let go of these like obsessions about candy. Halloween is just over. If I had to hear, can I have candy 1,000 times over? This is the way to sort of move away from that like obsession in their lunch. Put, as much as you possibly can in one reliable place. That way the kids don't have to ask. They know it's going to come and they know they can let it go. So I'll sort of wrap this up with this last story. My daughter actually said this to me. She said, I hate my cheeks, and she's 4, you guys. I could cry thinking about it. So it was a really hard thing. And the first thing that came to my mind, and this is my own weight bias, and I'll own it. She came downstairs and said, I don't like my cheeks. They're too big. And I said, my first reaction was to say, you don't have a fat face. And that in its own self is fat bias, because then I'm telling my daughter in that moment that being in a bigger body is a bad thing. And so it's things like that we really want you to like catch in your mind, of these really like small messages. And so to just really be open, like ask open-ended questions. What do you mean by that? What made you feel that way? And sort of creating a space where your children can come to you, whether they be 4 years old or 17 years old, that they can come to you and talk to you about how they feel about their body, and then know that you don't have judgment about it one way or the other, and they're not going to panic about it either. So I think that they're gonna have these slides available at a later date too. So I'm not gonna go through these, but these are really cool ideas for ways to talk about food in a less judgmental way. And I know some of this is like a little bit young age, but this shows some like wider ways of talking about food as it benefits, because we know that, food of all colors is really important. This last thing is just a card that I want to offer you guys, which is something that I do in our pediatrician's office too. We really encourage pediatricians at doctors' offices, wherever you go where a child may be weighed, to ask them to not talk about weight in front of your child. And if they have concerns, which they may, they can bring it to you and you can talk to them individually, so that a child doesn't feel like that direct correlation of like, my weight is the first thing that they get upon coming to the office, and it's relevant because it defines my health. It's just like one of the first messages that they're receiving. And that sort of like ends our presentation. Leslie, do you have anything else that you want to say?
I don't think so. I want to, I know we kind of covered a lot. And like I said, we could probably talk about every slide for 30 minutes. And it kind of goes against a lot of traditional kind of messaging. So if there are a lot of questions, we want to make sure that we have time to answer those. So we could start that if that works with the other host who's organizing this. Haley?
Yes, that sounds
Leah or somebody.
Sorry, yes, that sounds perfect.
Leah, do you want to ask the questions in the Q&A?
Oh, absolutely. All right. So our first questions, we have a couple. What do you think of adolescents drinking whey protein powder?
Do you have opinions, Leslie, or do you want me to do it?
Yeah, go ahead.
My opinions on whey protein. I could go off on a tangent about this, but the thing about the industry that makes protein powder is it's not regulated very well. And so my only concern with whey protein powder is what's in it. And so sometimes what happens with those products is that there's other things that are in it that we don't really know. And I don't mean this to be very scary, but sometimes there's things that get outlawed that then they'll go back and rename as a different substance and put it back in. And it's just not very well regulated in that way. It's not like they have to go through testing in order to be put on the shelves. And so it's only generally found out after the fact. And so again, that's just my biggest concern about whey proteins. We don't really know what's in there. And I'm not a big fan of sweeteners. So things like artificial sweeteners like stevia or Splenda or other things like that, just because we don't have a lot of data about them right now. I don't think it's bad to have in moderation, but most of those protein powders have some sort of sweetener in there. And so I just don't want anybody to be eating it in abundance. Leslie, do you have any other?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just want to know, like, what's the reason, like is my kid trying to like cut down, or is it my kid trying to lose weight? Am I trying to build muscle? And just making sure that they have like the right information, because again, if we start skipping meals and drinking like whey protein drinks, which like a lot of people will do that, you're probably not getting a lot nutritionally. And again, then we're kind of starting on this trend of like deprivation, mood alteration. So again, I mean, I think are they okay? I mean, I would be like, okay, fine, sure. Like have anything, as long as like you are getting enough of the other things. So I'll just preface a lot of our answers because like they're going to probably not be black and white, because like that's kind of our industry is like getting out of black and white, because we don't put everything just like in a box and we're really much in the gray. So yeah. So sorry.
The last random fact that I will say too, that I think is really important for people to know, is that we can't absorb that much protein either. So in a setting, women can only absorb somewhere between 15 to 20 grams, and men it's just a little bit higher. So a lot of those protein, or even the protein bars, like 45 grams of protein, like build muscle. And that I've always said Americans have the most expensive pee, because we're just peeing out all this stuff that we don't actually use. So even if you are using whey, great, then use the appropriate amount too.
Thank you. Okay, next question. My kids are constantly eating since they are constantly home. How do I know if they are hungry or just bored? Do I let them eat or try to put up some guardrails?
I love
That's a good question.
Yeah. Leslie and I talked about this actually when we were sort of practicing this presentation, because we have a hard time with it too. My daughter loves snacks. She would live and die on them. I really encourage parents, you get to set the times. So in a really small way, I say, set a time, like breakfast is at this time, snacks at this time, lunch is at this time. And then when they ask for more, say, okay, dinner's at 5, or snacks at 3, whatever it is. And then that way I think eventually it'll be something that they just sort of know, and then you can train their body in that way. Because I think our concern is that if a kiddo is eating all day, they're not going to really have that like hunger that they need for a dinner meal or whatever. And so again, they're just sort of piecemealing through the day and probably not getting their needs met in a more meaningful way. Leslie, do you have any?
No, I mean, I think that's perfect. And I think, I also have I have a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, and then being at home, it's just like the kitchen is always open, and then I'm being at work, so I can't really monitor it. So it's been really difficult. And so again, I think like we kind of said at the beginning, like we're just in survival mode right now. And I think as kids go back, that structure is going to help. Making sure that you are setting boundaries. I think there's a great resource. Her name is Ellen Satter, and she really kind of helps kind of create a lot of boundaries, so that whoever asked that question or anybody, you might want to check out that website. But I do think, like you get to say what time, and then the kids are usually responsible for like how much, and then I think if you see that consistent schedule and you still are worried about like it could be emotional, that's when you might want to ask your kid what's going on, but don't say like, hey, I notice you're eating a lot, because then that might shut that conversation down. So just kind of being like, hey, is there anything going on, or, getting the help of a therapist.
Thank you. Next question. What can I do if I'm concerned that my child has an eating disorder?
I would say jump on it. What we know, and I know this is not my typical, I'm sort of a more laid back person, but what we know about eating disorders is early intervention is key, especially with children. And so really the recovery has everything to do with early intervention. And so what we know is the longer somebody acts out in their eating disorder, no matter the severity, a lot of people think, well, she's not that skinny, so must not really be that big of a deal. Doesn't matter. The longer they're acting in behaviors, no matter what that is, the least likely recovery is going to happen. So early intervention, I think, get in there, say, I notice this is happening, what's going on? And a lot of time kids put up walls about that. And so I say, get them a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
Leslie?
No, absolutely. And I would say that like start with a therapist, because one thing we like to say a lot is like, it's all about the food, and then it's not about the food at all. And so I think the best place to start would be a therapist, to kind of get that kiddo to kind of open up, and kind of maybe start to feel and talk a little bit more before we can kind of jump in. I think oftentimes as parents, it's something so tangible, it's easy, like it's food, we can see it, we can give it, we can observe it. So it just feels like, oh, we could fix it with food. But I think you start with a therapist. That's what I would recommend.
Thank you. How do you support a child who is overly concerned about his or her weight?
Well, I think I'd go back to what we talked about first, of like sort of assessing where they're getting that information from. I'm a big advocate of just sort of like fostering open communication. And so as much as you can, I think just like foster an open conversation and notice those things. And be open about the way that you are experiencing your own body and sort of how that's impacting them. And so I think going back to those slides of like, try as much as you can to notice where you're role modeling that information. And then again, I know that we feel sort of heavy-handed on the therapist bit, but I really think that therapists, like I can't think of one person that I know that wouldn't benefit from therapy. And so again, I know therapy sometimes is scary too, that people think they're going to be seeing a therapist for 40 years, and maybe, or it could just be that, it's a short time to get them through like a blip of a really hard time in their life. So if you feel like it's sort of out of your hands, I really encourage seeking a therapist.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I would add, I mean, in this last week, I think I've had 4 14-year-olds. And I feel like that age, because again, their bodies are starting puberty, and, different schools, like there's just so much going on that, like, I think a lot of that language around like obsession about body is really just sort of acceptance. Like, I'm feeling weird. I'm starting to look weird. Like, I just want to be accepted. I want to be loved. I don't I like, I don't know what's going on. And so I do feel like a lot of it stems from self-confidence, and just being accepted. And so, yeah, again, like, yes, we're heavy handed with the therapy, but, I think that would be a good place to start. And I think never shutting down those conversations, like if somebody says I'm fat, it's again, like asking like, what makes you say that? Because I think it just opens up, like, I think kids can use that language when, like I said, they might just feel like, nobody wanted to sit with me at lunch, and they are like, oh, well, I look bigger. So maybe that's the reason. So, you know, talk therapy is so helpful. And if that's hard to do as a parent, because we're so like, we just want to fix it. And we just want to be like, no, you're not, you're beautiful. You're perfect just the way you are. And really, again, that's like shutting down that communication. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think you get to set boundaries around food too, no matter the age, right? Like I think there's a rule against like, we don't diet in our family, right? Or you don't, right? Like you can make that decision when you're older, when you're an adult, if that's something you decide to do, but like not allowing that to be a factor. And I think that sort of fosters more conversation rather than fixing it with food.
Awesome. Next question. Where do you draw the line between natural consequences for health choices and body acceptance?
I think I know where this is going, but I might need some clarification. I think the question is about sort of what we get caught in, which is if you're in a bigger body, that maybe you're not healthy. Is that sort of your read on it, Leslie, or what did you hear it differently?
That's what I.
Or if the person wants to clarify.
If the person who asked that wants to raise their hand, we can unmute you, I believe. So yeah, if you just want to raise your hand. Oh, hang on, now I have to find out how. Sorry, I'm still working on the All right.
Hello?
Michael, you're unmuted. You can ask away.
Awesome.
Hi, Michael.
So my question comes as far as natural consequences, as far as if you don't eat your food, then hunger is a natural consequence of not eating, and that there's nothing necessarily wrong with hunger. And that kind of ties into my other question I was going to ask of, is constantly eating or eating 3 meals a day or constantly snacking actually healthy? And is there any science behind that? Or is that just something that's just kind of cultural?
Thanks for clarifying. That makes sense. Go ahead, Leslie.
Well, just in terms of like the last section of that, like the eating all day long, nutrition science is a lot of the science that comes out is correlation and not causation. So human individuals are very, very difficult to study. And so what we end up getting is like, oh, this study found that, intermittent fasting like created weight loss in these individuals or whatever. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that like that diet is right for you, but it created that side effect. And so I think, like I was saying in that slide, like we don't really know. And you can have really like doctors writing all these different diet books that provide like, this is the answer. And I think, you really have to think about, well, what is the outcome that you want? And what is, like how, like I'm going to just use keto diet for some reason, because that keeps popping up in my head, like, does that work for you for the rest of your life? Like, okay, fine. Like I said, I don't think that we wouldn't name a diet as like, this is the one that you have to follow and this is the one that you shouldn't follow. But what we see is just like dieting in general is the thing that creates the problem. It's not necessarily the particular diet. So, a diet full and high in carbohydrates might work for you, because again, I don't think your health is defined by your diet. And again, your weight is not defined by your diet. And a lot of the diets that are prescribed out there are all about like how to control your weight.
Yeah. And so I think too that, the question of like hunger being a natural consequence, I think, I think that's why we're saying it's good. And I think especially for children need to be eating often. And so, they need 3 meals is not enough for a child. A child needs to be offered snacks in between too, because that's how their metabolic system works in general. Everybody's body is really different as far as what their needs are. But in general, like that's what we suggest, because we know, again, this is like a generalized statement that that's the need. And so, if a child chooses to not eat a snack, then they'll learn that, okay, it's okay for me to be hungry. I know that lunch is coming afterwards. And then that kid doesn't have to get frantic and sort of worried about eating all the time. Do you feel like we addressed the question? Do you have anything else to say to that, Leslie?
I don't think so. I don't know
Okay.
if that addressed it, Michael, if you're still able to clarify.
Michael, go ahead and raise your hand again if you still have, oh, he still has his hand. Let me unmute you.
I guess you did answer some of my question, but it's a little bit just more complicated than that. I've just seen in my own child and other people's children as far as just, being afraid of letting them be hungry and then allowing them to make poorer and poorer choices as far as diet and nutrition, to the point to where they're eating things that have no nutritional value whatsoever, just to appease the kid or appease themselves, as far as the fear and anxiety of allowing their kids to have those consequences to their choices.
So I see that
yeah,
pops up like when my kids were younger, and there was that like fear of like, oh my God, they didn't eat dinner. They're going to be up all night long. And so it's like, fine, if you want like the cookies, just eat it. Cause then I know that you're going to sleep. Like I don't know if that kind of is, kind of what you're talking about, but I do feel like, like kids have to learn the natural consequence. Like it's okay for your kids to feel hungry, and I do feel like with time they will understand that, like, I better eat dinner, or I think that's when the parents have the control of like, hey, you didn't eat dinner, I can offer you a snack, but it's going to look like this, like it's not going to be cookies and ice cream. Like your snacks could be like apple slices and peanut butter, or it could be just a banana or something like that.
Yeah, and I actually did sleep training recently with my child. They said this point that I think is really important. They said that your child's hunger at that nighttime has nothing to do with the dinner or what they just had. It has to do with the accumulation of the day. And so what that means is, and we all know this, that is an accumulation of the day. You're not hungry at the end of the day necessarily because, if you skipped dinner, then obviously, but it's the accumulation of the day that's really like that I want you to like zoom out. Like, are they getting enough in the day? And I do think that naturally a kid, this is like the old thing. I feel like my parents and their grandparents said, like, if a kid's hungry, they're going to eat. Right. And I do think that there's some truth to that too, that they will be hungry at some point. I think that there is like a learning curve though, of like not offering food all the time, because then a child will not learn like that there's 3 anchored meals, right? You need to be eating a bigger lunch, and their body will learn that, I think, over time, if you can just offer the boundaries of like, this is snack time and here's what's offered. This is lunchtime and here's what offered. Mm-hmm. No matter what the food is. And I think sometimes it's like offering them a safe food. So I think, Michael was saying like foods that might not have like nutritional relevance. And so maybe you do offer some of that stuff, but also things that are a little more nutritionally dense, like proteins and vegetables and things like that too, knowing that eventually they'll choose to eat those over time if we can continue just sort of holding this neutral place.
Awesome. So the next question is, do you recommend any vitamins or other supplements for children?
I mean, I don't, mostly again, because I'm not really familiar with that. And it is like a very unregulated industry. A lot of it is, we don't really know what's in that product, and they can sell it and say it's, diamonds and pearls, and it's not. It's ashes and soot. So like I don't personally recommend it. I don't think it's harmful to like have a daily multivitamin. I think that's fine, but as far as like a brand that I would recommend, I don't have anything. Lauren, do you?
I think the one thing I can think of though is that sometimes I think the downside to offering a multivitamin is that sometimes as parents, or even as like an older child that takes a multivitamin, they think to themselves, okay, my nutritional value is taken care of today. I can just like eat whatever I want. And I don't want to foster that. I want my child to know that when you eat red things, you're getting these great things. And when you're eating yellow things, you're getting these great things. And that we know that children grow best from food. That, and the plain fact is, no matter if you're a child or an adult, you're going to get the most nutrition from food. the most bioavailable vitamins and minerals, no matter protein, carbohydrates, fat, or vitamin C, you're going to get from food. And so I would always encourage offering that with food.
Thank you. Next, is there any nutritional value in carbohydrates or sugar?
Yes. Do you want to go, Leslie, or you want me to?
No, go for it.
Okay. Sorry, this is something I think a lot of our diets nowadays are focused, the biggest nemesis right now is carbohydrates or sugar. I think the thing I want to start with is clarifying. I think sometimes the carbohydrates, glucose, sugar are all used in the same, as the same word, and they're not the same thing. So carbohydrates are just a source of carbohydrates. You could get carbohydrates from, whole wheat. You could get carbohydrates from Skittles. You can get carbohydrates from an apple. Sugar, and when we're saying sugar, I think a lot of people think sugar as in Skittles. Okay, that could be that language. And then glucose is another factor. Glucose is the blood form of eating carbohydrates. So carbohydrates coming from Skittles or wheat. And so, your brain uses glucose as a primary source. This is very, I'm going to just sort of explicitly say, it's some stuff that's being thrown about in the world right now that you don't need glucose or carbohydrates to survive, which is not true. What happens a lot of times in these diets is you have a reserve of something called ketones that's stored in your liver and muscle tissue. And sometimes in these diets, keto diet, you can understand where the keto word comes from now. If you don't eat carbohydrates or get glucose from intake, your body uses reserves called ketones. And I could go into the whole science of this, but for lack of time, ketones, the problem with ketones is they're used and they burn fat. And so people think that's a great thing, right? Like ketones are something that's available for our body to use that is from fat and protein. The problem with ketones is that they increase the acidity of your blood, which over time can cause brain damage. Your body does not want to use ketones as energy. It's a backup source for if you're starving in a jungle somewhere. And so, yes, absolutely, glucose is absolutely needed via carbohydrates for brain function and just sort of all over body function. If we don't have enough, then our body uses these backup resources that aren't ideal. And also aren't sustainable, which is the whole purpose of this conversation. Leslie, do you have anything to say to that?
Yeah, and again, I think exactly what you said, and just thinking about again, we're not picking on the keto diet. That's so funny that you just mentioned that one, and I've mentioned it twice. The purpose of a diet like that is not really for overall health and sustainability. It's really for like a quick weight loss. Weight loss is a stressful process on your body, and you kind of explained that, how the ketones work. So again, it's how our carbohydrates have a function. Like, yes, like 100%, and we need to be eating them. When we are seeing like in a lot of these diets that like if you limit them, you can achieve weight loss. But like, again, that doesn't necessarily correlate to a healthy human individual.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the last question we have is just about the food pyramid, whether or not is that still something that's relevant, or is that just kind of an obsolete idea?
Go ahead, Lauren,
Sure. Yeah. So, my opinion is, and I'll overgeneralize it, that those things are created as sort of to be used as like how do I say this? Yes, it's relevant because it shows something, right? It shows that the bulk of your intake should be with carbohydrates, grain sources, and then it goes up from there. But I think what people see is a judgmental view, right? That these type of foods are really good and that these type of foods at the very top are really bad. And that's not what it's trying to show. The purpose was trying to show quantity, right? You should be eating more quantity of grains than you should of fats, let's say. But again, I think we see the view in a very different way with this like diet culture, judgmental view. And I think that's the issue with it and why we sort of pulled back from it, especially for children. I think there's lots of ways that you can go about it, but what I want you to take away from that, or a plate model, or any of the other models that have been used in our nutritional society, is that majority of your plate should look like carbohydrates. A smaller portion should look like protein and vegetables, and then fat should be distributed somewhere in between. And that's sort of the general takeaway, which I know is so non-specific, and everybody just wants like this like direct, straight answer of like, here's what you need and how much you need. But the problem is our second point to this presentation is that everybody's body is really different, and so everybody's needs are really different too. We can give you generalized guidance of what we know, but I don't know the ins and outs of your body and what your body needs. Like talking about the keto diet was used for people that have disease states that really benefit from that. Intermittent fasting was used for that too. But the diet culture has taken those things and saw that, oh my God, weight loss is potential. Let's like take it and make it something that it was not. And I think that's our issue with it. It's like, there's nothing bad about those things generally. The food pyramid, a diet, whatever was created with good intent and was just sort of twisted to be a part of the diet culture in an unhealthy way. And then it sort of becomes more of an obsession. That's just the unhelpful part of it. Leslie?
No, I think that's well said.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. That is all of our questions. I want to thank all of the participants for asking such amazing questions. You all are wonderful. And also thank you everyone who joined today. And most of all, thank you, Lauren and Leslie. We will be sending out this presentation, recording of the presentation in the next day or two. And we will also, if it's okay with you both, include your contact information in that follow-up email. And then also, I don't know if you're interested, Lauren and Leslie, if you'd like to put your contact in the chat for anybody to reach out to you with follow-up questions.
Sure.
Great.
Yeah, thank you. It was nice being here and being able to kind of share this radical information. I'm sure some people are leaving saying that, but I think it's just really the take home is like, we're all trying our best. And, again, it's a lot of it is just kind of the language that we use around things, and that it's not as simple as just the food that we put in our mouth.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. And so just